So we've got the keys, apparently. Now I just need to figure out what these keys go to. If I could have titled this sermon differently, and I'm titling them all based on the words on the windows, I'd call this sermon, "Give Us an Inch and We'll Take a Mile." I want to talk about that, but first I want to kind of go through a couple of things. First, I want to talk a little bit about the window. So I gave you a picture of it so that, because it's a field trip to the window would really wig Miriam out right now, because that's, 140 people sitting in her pew. Just, you heard some of what we talked about. I just want to talk a little bit more about, it's hard to get in the artist's head to know what all is going on next. I will name that it is common in medieval Christian works to put Peter and James and John's name in gold, because they are the inner circle of disciples, and because we often will relate to Peter as the first pope, which is partly because of this text, I think, where Peter is the recipient of the keys. It did, as I told you before, you do get like the Acts listing of the names, and then somebody is going to ask me about why Simon's name is in red. And the educator in me wants to give you what I know. There may be three different reasons, which means it's probably the fourth that I'm not going to tell you because I don't see it. One, Simon is in Scripture. Well, back up for a moment. Name identification in Scripture is difficult because they have a lot of the same names. For instance, Jude is a version of Judah, which, is the nation of Judah. So there's a lot of them running around, right? And Simon, we get a couple different Simons, but Simon that is listed as among the disciples and apostles is always referenced scripturally as Simon the Zealot. Now, what zealot means there is generally interpreted as one of two different things. One is that it's a person of great zeal. As Isaiah said, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And zeal is like really passionate faith, right? Caught up in the Spirit. So it could be that Simon is just referenced as the guy who's just really passionate. In this case, maybe red makes sense because it's the color of the heart, the blood pumping. And so maybe that's why Simon is red. Others interpret that Simon was of the Jewish group known as the Zealots, who wanted, a la the Maccabees, to overthrow Rome and instigated through assassination and violence the Jewish war of 66 to 70 that led to Rome destroying the temple. The problem with that is the Zealots as a people didn't exist in the time of Jesus, but it did exist in the time of writing the Gospels. So maybe it's red because he's violent, like Ares, like Mars, and they think of Simon as the revolutionary. And it could be red because there's red at the top of the window, and why not have some red at the bottom of the window? Which is to say, I don't know. But there are some possible things that could be going on with that window. So we've got this window, and it also demonstrates something else. How are those names rendered? So the names are written on what? Crosses. And I think this is important to us because I think it reminds us an important aspect of this text, that when we bear the keys of the kingdom, we are also bearing Christ's cross. Jesus says to his disciples, pick up your cross. In Luke's account, I love the way Luke renders it, pick up your cross daily and follow me. It's not a thing we set aside. So the understanding of our leadership, the understanding of the leadership of the disciples become apostles, the understanding of what it means to bear the keys of heaven and all that binding and loosing power is also checked by the reality that you are one who bears the cross of Christ in all that you do. And just for a fascinating little historical note, the crosses as we know them that are big and tall like this are probably not what the crosses looked like then. They were probably more squat, or sometimes they didn't have the top little thing. And multiple of the disciples and apostles will themselves die on a cross. We get a hint of that scripturally when Peter has the "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" text, and then it says, "Now you go." Jesus says to Peter, "Now you choose where it is you will go, but in the days to come they will hoist you up in recognition of Jesus' death, also on a cross." So we have this keys and crosses image, and I want to tease that out a little bit as we think about this text, which is itself a fascinating text and probably could, in the course of 7 verses, give us at least 3 sermons, 2 of which would probably be interesting. So it starts with Jesus talking about I love Jesus as a teacher. He's got that enigmatic flavor to him. So he says, who do you think the Son of Man is? And they give answers. Elijah is a popular messianic figure. Elijah was carried up in flames up into heaven, and so we keep a seat for Elijah. We think about Elijah who is supposed to come again. Some will think of Jesus as Elijah on the cross. So it's popular to think about Elijah as Son of Man language. The Son of Man language itself is probably drawn out of Daniel 7, when the messianic figure of Daniel 7 is pictured as one like a human being, right? So Jesus starts off with, who is this Son of Man? This little side Jewish resurrection-oriented messianic figure. And then the next question is what? Who do you say I am? Now, if I was in the room, if I was Peter, I'd be like, wait, are you saying that you're the Son of Man? And I'm pretty sure Jesus would say, well, you just said I was, right? Which is a very Jesus kind of enigmatic move. But Jesus has linked these things now. Who do you say the Son of Man is? Who do you say I am? And in a moment of insight, Peter gets it right. Which is fascinating because Peter generally gets nothing right within the gospel text. In Acts, Peter is the rock Jesus imagines. Peter leads with authority, and Peter leads with humility and service and confidence. In the Gospels, I like to think of Peter as the guy who sits in the front row, and every time the teacher asks a question, he goes, "Oh, I know. And the teacher calls him, and then what does Peter do then? What was the question again? Right? He wants to please Jesus, but he doesn't really know, and he's just super eager to get it all right. But he lacks the yet spiritual maturity to follow through on that. But Jesus sees the Peter that will be in him. So who do you say I am? We know who you are. You are the Messiah of God. And then we get a little, I can't preach on the text without acknowledging it. We get the little piece at the end. Someone out there is wondering, why does Jesus say, don't tell anybody? I had a beautiful moment at First Light because Lily Marshall asked that question when I was starting a congregational meeting in 9 minutes. And I said, you want me to answer the Messianic secret in 9 minutes and finish worship? That's not going to happen. There's a common thing going on in the Gospels that we call the Messianic secret because again and again, Jesus tells people not to tell him who he is when they correctly identify him as the Messiah. Now, spoiler alert, it's the worst kept secret ever. Just as Jesus is terrible at hide and go seek, and he plays it with the crowds repeatedly in the Gospels, and they repeatedly find him every time. The secret of the messiahship of Jesus is very poorly kept. We should know because we're here. But for the why, it's going to touch a little bit on this window. So I want to just skim across the top of this. And I'll tell you the same thing I told First Light. I can't stand the movie Titanic. And I hated the movie Avatar. Now, we can get in a debate whether it's about the merits of the movie on their own and inherently whether they're good or not, but I'll tell you the real reason. I was very late to watching them. And by the time I got around to it, they were the best movies ever. And I watched it and was entirely underwhelmed and didn't think they were. Now, I'm also a great connoisseur of C- movies after Caroline goes to bed at night. And what I love about them is it's almost impossible for them to be as bad as I think they're going to be. Some of them achieve it. But generally speaking, I have no expectation. Anything good that comes of that movie is a win over what I expect. We are driven by our expectations. And the messianic expectations of Israel are all over the map. And Jesus will live up to almost none of them. Don't lay your messianic baggage on me. Let my ministry and mission unfold in your life and speak for itself. Because I will be no David conquering king, and I will not fix all your problems for you. So don't put that on me. I give thee the key to the kingdom. Just 2 days ago, a gentleman named Wayne Overmiller died. He was a salesman that worked for my dad. I remembered I was 17 and I was working that summer, as I often did, at my dad's company doing bookkeeping stuff. And Wayne Overmiller, this was one of those kid things. I never quite understood why my dad's salespeople all made more money than he did. And Wayne Overmiller drove like a flashy Lexus. This is the late 80s, early 90s. We're talking a car that talked at you. To a kid who grew up on Knight Rider, right? So here I am, 17, and Wayne Overmiller, I need your hands to be right here, Brandon. Yes, I'm looking at you. Wayne Overmiller goes, Andrew, go pick that up from the store. And I got to drive a talking car. Do you know what that's like? My first car was a 1976 Buick LeSabre. Its talking mostly sounded like groans, right? I got to turn this car on and it said things like, your door is ajar. Now, anyone who owned talking cars in those days quickly got annoyed by them. But it was so cool. And he just tossed me the keys. Like, does he know I'm 17? Does he know that I'm a 17-year-old driver and I can't replace this car if I wreck it? And I think in almost that kind of way, Jesus tosses the keys to Peter. Here are the keys of the kingdom. And Peter's like juggling, catching it, right? Because I don't think Jesus warned him to get his arm off of his wife before he tossed them to him. And Peter's, I could just picture it. Peter's like, Bob, catches, I got the keys, right? Now, juxtapose this message with what I think we've done with that. What I think we did with this, I give you the keys, and whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth is loose in heaven. And we decided that made us like kings. That the church became the gatehouse to heaven. And that church's dogma decided who was in and who was out. And the church got to parcel out God's grace. Like God was waiting to see what we would do and say, yeah, that. That. I liken it not altogether different from the Genesis 1 text in which Jesus says to Jesus. Pardon that, let's just strike that from the record. God said to Adam, I give you the world, I give you dominion over the world to subjugate as you would want the world. And we said, ooh, I like that word dominion. And subjugate sounds pretty good too. And we highlighted in the texts the patriarchal nature of it, the we get to decide what God does-ness of it in the world. And we decided the world was ours to do with as we will. We forget the parts of the text that have God working in partnership with the earth to coax life out, that have God saying, let us make humankind in our image. They aren't individually the image of God, only collectively working together are they the image of God. God partnering with the seas to bring forth things. And in Genesis 2 saying, I put you, Adam, in the garden because it is your job to till and to keep it. Those sound much less interesting to us. So we're going to latch on to dominance and subjugation. We're going to hold on to the keys and forget the crosses. Give us an inch and we will take a mile. I like to imagine that what Jesus is doing in this text is revealing to us yet another layer of his incarnation. Jesus, whom we will name fully human and fully divine, is telling us the doors of heaven aren't closed to you anymore. We're reading Revelation right now on Wednesday nights, and we sort of understand what it means. And one of the things I forgot to note on Wednesday, spoiler alert, those of you who didn't hear me say this on Wednesday, is it regularly talks about the doors being opened for John in his vision. The door is opened and left open so that John can go and come from the earth and heavenly realm to see things as God sees it and bring that back to the churches, right? Jesus says, I give thee the keys. You aren't barred from heaven. What's happening here on earth is happening up here in heaven. What you yearn and work for on earth is being yearned and worked for in heaven. They aren't two different places anymore. But Jesus, as God's incarnation, are the marrying of heaven and earth, of dust and breath, just as Adam was years ago, eons ago. I give you the keys. Be careful with them. But I trust you. I think we talk a lot about the faith we have or should have in God, the faith we could have and should have in Jesus. We forget to be awed by the faith God has in us. That God, like a heavenly parent, knows we're going to crash the car, but that the only way we will mature into the adults we need to become is to toss us the keys anyway. I trust you with the keys. Live up to that trust. May we walk not as those who sit a throne, but as those who carry a cross, but have keys to connect everyone else with that same love, that same trust, that same abiding faithfulness that says every door that's been barred to you, I've got the key for that. I give thee the keys. Use them. This is the word of the Lord.